Esmeralda Swartz.
Thank you. Thank you, Roger. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I hope you had a great day yesterday. I know speaking for those of us in the booth floor, we're off to, I think, a pretty good start. As Roger said, I'm VP of Enterprise and Cloud at Ericsson, which is a global provider of equipment, software for many industries ranging from operators to IoT and cloud. Metrotech was a monetization company that they acquired, and monetization to us, as we talked about yesterday in the panel session, means something perhaps differently than what you may think. When I say monetization, I'm really talking about both sides of the coin. So the bill that we all understand, we get those every month, as well as the settlement, which is a really important factor when you start thinking about IoT. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today, what it's going to take to advance IoT from where it is today, which is really about connectivity and sensors and devices and what needs to happen to evolve it to an IoT ecosystem. Okay, so the question I always get is, are we nearly there yet? And this is really important because I think today we're still at the infancy stage, but we're beginning to see the progression across many different industries. If you look at it at its most basic level, IoT is the interconnection of the physical environment with the internet. And using that very simple description, Uber would be classified as an IoT company. But how many of you in the audience actually believe that Uber is an IoT company? Just a raise of hands. So none of you believe that to be true. But the rest of the world is classifying Uber as an IoT company. Now, Uber provides what I would consider to be the most important aspect of what it takes to develop a compelling value prop that will result in mass adoption of a technology or an application in the market. They utilize a very basic service that we can all relate to. We all need to get from point A to point B. They use the cloud to provide the algorithm and that user experience. And they have sensors on the phones, whether it's our phone, the driver's phone, et cetera. So you could argue that they could be an IoT player. But that's really not what it's going to take to evolve IoT and realize its true potential. Another company that I think we all recognize, I don't know how many of you actually have a Nest thermostat at home, just a show of hands. So do you all believe that Nest is an IoT company? Show of hands. So all of you believe that. I'll give you an interesting factoid. When they were acquired by Google, even though they were a self-learning thermostat and we could all see the potential of that as an application, most people actually turned off the self-learning and they just bought the Nest thermostat because it looked really cool. And, you know, one of my favorite quotes actually is from Mark Andreessen, and he recently commented that Google acqui-hired Tony Riddell for $3.2 billion and got a thermostat business on the side. Now, given that Tony is now taking over for driving Google Glass, I think they actually got a pretty good deal, irrespective of if you believe that to be true. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Gartner hype cycle or Magic Quadrant. And what I found really interesting about this is that in 2013, big data was at the top of the hype cycle in terms of the peak of inflated expectations. And IoT this year, or actually in 2014, replaced big data at the top of the hype cycle. And you'll see cloud actually is on its way down in what they call the trough of disillusionment. And what I find really fascinating about this is that if you think about IoT, cloud, big data, it's those three technologies combined that really realize the full potential for IoT, because you cannot develop new services, you cannot drive the user experience, the access to data without cloud. You need data from those sensors to actually be able to monetize and drive new services into the marketplace. So in looking at this particular chart, I would say that all of these technologies are actually at the infancy stage. And if you look at even cloud, this year marks the first year where you're starting to even see enterprises adopt cloud in a big way. So all of these technologies combined were right at the cusp of being able to drive a lot of the innovation in the industry that benefits from these three technologies coming together. So let's take a look now at a time capsule. If you look at how long it actually took to connect the world and drive global connectivity, it took about 100 years. If you look at the next shift, which was the movement to personal mobility, it took about 25 years to connect 5 billion people across the globe. Whether you believe that IoT, in terms of the number of connected devices by 2020, will be 50 billion or 30 billion, it's a huge number. And if you look at the pace at which this is happening, it's happening faster than any other major transformation in history in terms of driving this global connectivity. And the digital society will be realized faster with more and more connections than any other major paradigm that's occurred before. And I always like to take a look at how close are we to that projection in terms of where, what are analysts saying, and are we getting close? We track on a quarterly basis the number of new mobile connections across the globe. And in Q1 2015, there were 108 million new mobile subscribers across the world. As you would expect, some of the developing countries are obviously at the forefront because they're coming from a period of no connectivity and certainly not where they need to be. But you start looking at some of what's happening across the globe, and we are now a truly globally connected society that can start to realize the potential of IoT and cloud for the good of digital citizens, as Roger talked about, society at large, and all of you in the room, as well as even the public sector. And what makes all of this happen? So we talked a lot before about the world is increasingly connected. I don't think any one of us is going to argue that connectivity with our mobile phones, smartphones, is ubiquitous. But at the end of the day, that's really the starting point. The infrastructure clearly needs to be there. The cloud needs to evolve to the point where it's providing the freedom for people to be able to develop new types of applications at a cost that we've not seen before. But software is really the connective tissue for all value creation. And it's not just IoT. If you look at throughout history, it's really been software that's made it possible to drive the innovation in the applications. You build the ecosystem, you build the platforms, and the value is realized from the software and the applications that then reside on top of those hardware platforms. Look no further than Apple in terms of what it's been doing and continues to do in deploying smartphones, smart devices, smart watches. But where's that all headed? It's clearly trying to build up that base, but then it's all about the applications and the software that they layer on top to realize the true value. If you look at where we are today, just as a starting point, I don't think anyone in the room would argue that today one of the missing ingredients from Internet of Things is the interconnectivity, or the Internet. We have stovepipes, we have devices, we have the connectivity, and it's really about today driving the efficiency in internal business processes by being able to squeeze efficiency from what the data is telling you from these connected devices. Where we need to move to is away from these closed-loop solutions, and we need to, as an industry, and all of you are clearly part of this in the audience, and move to more open ecosystems where we are fostering open innovation, driving data analytics across a horizontal ecosystem as opposed to the vertical layers that we have today, and automation and creating marketplaces, so horizontal marketplaces that are serving specific industries. And I'll go through some examples in a number of different verticals where we're already starting to see this happen. So let's look at one that we're all familiar with. One of the truisms that I think everyone in the room would agree is true. When it comes to developing a technology, it doesn't matter what it is. If it doesn't serve either making something simpler or making the complex possible, you don't have a technology that will win in the market. And the applications that tend to drive a lot of the attention, the adoption across the market are the ones that actually tend to be solving very simple problems. And this is a chart from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Stats that they put out. And it points at opportunities in terms of where people are spending their time. So many of you in the room drive to the office or other places, but if you look at the average time that you're spending per person in a car every single day, and this is for employees in the U.S. ranging from the ages of 25 to 54, it's about 1.5 hours every single day. So that clearly represents an opportunity to drive some efficiency and drive automation in terms of what IoT can represent to perform secondary tasks and allow the driver to do what he or she is supposed to be doing, which is driving the car and not texting, not looking up an appointment because they're late. We all do it. We're all guilty of this. Some of the applications that we're already seeing include the obvious ones. So the car infotainment, clearly if you are deploying, whether it's a 3G, 4G, LTE infrastructure, you deploy that, you're going to have the opportunity to then focus on some of the applications. And infotainment is the obvious first choice. And so we're already seeing that. Telematics, there's clearly a lot that can be done in terms of using IoT and sensors to drive efficiency in emergency response. And those are applications that are here today and that we can all relate to. Some that are, I think, here already, but perhaps not as well known, include fleet management. So we have one of our customers is one of the largest trucking suppliers around the world. And all of their trucks are now armed with sensors where they're taking advantage of platooning. They're using it to improve the fuel efficiency. All of these new applications that are now possible, including because they are, in effect, in the logistics business, using the data from these fleets and being able to look at an opportunity to resell that to financial companies that can use it as a good view into what's about to happen in supply chains. So entirely new industries that can be created, or at least entirely new sources of revenue, just simply from having all of this sensor technology and big data and then the cloud to allow you to realize its full potential. And insurance and insurance tracking. So basically, this is a pretty obvious one, using sensor data from how you're driving to provide incentives in terms of insurance. Now, where are we headed? And this is actually a company that it's not a future. This is actually being done already. But even in the car, there's already prototypes that are about to be realized very soon, where your car is going to become your personal assistant. So it's evolving even beyond you getting into the car. It recognizes your mobile phone, your seat preference, the temperature, all of that, it becomes automated. But it's now gone beyond that, where your assistant in your car can look at your Outlook calendar. And if there's an appointment that's there, and depending on how you're doing and the road conditions, it can send out an automatic alert telling the appointment that you're going to be late. Now, I personally could take advantage of that today. I don't know about the rest of you, but that's where we're headed. So that's, I think, an example of an application that we could all relate to because it impacts and makes our everyday life more efficient. This is my favorite. I'm going to go through and talk about a few areas because there is not, I think, an industry that is not being impacted by IoT. And this happens to be my favorite one because IoT is actually, in a peculiar way, responsible for making Walt Disney's vision of a frictionless, magical customer experience come to life. I don't know how many of you have recently taken your kids to Disney World, but if you are now going to Disney World, you will be provided with a magic band. So they spent a lot of money getting the infrastructure in place to make this possible. You go to the park, that magic band, you can go online, reserve your restaurant. Because you have that magic band, when you appear at the restaurant, they will greet you personally. Just imagine the experience for your kids, being able to pre-order everything that you do at the park. I mean, that's a basic application, is using this wristband, but just that personalization and that improved customer experience that can be had because they know everything that there is to know about you. So if you want to understand what the impact of IoT will be, I think skipping Silicon Valley or even New York and making a plane reservation to head down to Disney World provides you with a view of what happens when your mobile device becomes the keeper of your identity and your money. And then the industrial internet, I know in previous years, GE has been a great example that epitomizes the potential of IoT, cloud, and data on the industrial internet. We are now at the point where we have already moved from connected products to software-driven services. For those of you that may not be aware, Rolls-Royce was really the pioneer 50 years ago of the selling a product as a service, the jet engine. This is before cloud computing even existed as a term. And now we've come back full circle where we're starting to see the new, what the World Economic Forum calls the industrial awakening. And the expectations is that it's going to result in over $14 trillion of global output by 2020. It is this that is exciting as an industry, and we're already seeing the impact of that. Any new technology always starts with economics. In the case of the industrial internet, if you look at different industry sectors, just 1% savings in efficiency as a result from industrial internet solutions can save billions in OpEx. So if you look at the impact on The aviation industry, just from cost savings associated with fuel, $30 billion. Gas and powered fleets, $66 billion. So there's already a lot of efficiency just from the impact of having that data and using that data to drive a better, more efficient process across the entire ecosystem. So if you take a look at just industrial internet, this is data from a recent World Economic Forum survey looking at what are the benefits in terms of driving the business adoption of industrial internet solutions. As you would expect, a lot of the emphasis is actually on creating new revenue streams as a result of new products and services. So I point back to GE as, again, the good example of this. They have all of this industrial machinery. It's now deployed with thousands, if not millions, of sensors across the globe. There's data that comes from those sensors. They have an analytics layer, and they have a cloud layer. And there's data that's coming from all of that machinery, and that's an opportunity to resell that data back to those industrial customers. So that's an example of what's already happening in this sector. So what's going to get in the way? I think all of us in this room have a responsibility to, in fact, allow the opportunity of IoT, which if you look at any of the analyst projections, $1.7 trillion is being projected, and that number varies depending on who you talk to, but it's big. So what's going to get in the way? We're today in a very siloed approach to how we go about producing products and services. As vendors, we're all afraid to relinquish control and have others benefit from our innovation. We don't like sharing. That's true of our personal as well as our business life. And we don't want others to drive money from the work that we're doing. Standards and interconnectivity, clearly a problem. We need to evolve to more open standards, interoperability to drive these horizontal ecosystems away from the siloed vertical approach that we have today. We cannot do it ourselves. Even a global player like Ericsson, which has some of that stack, we need outside innovation to make this possible and really drive the efficiency and the new services for IoT. So what's that business core that needs to be in place? We have to be able to go from just very simple services to driving that horizontal ecosystem that I talked about. We need to be able to compensate other partners or resellers or channels or partners that make up that ecosystem. And that means that behind the scenes, well, although the service may be simple, behind the scenes, there's a lot that needs to happen to really bring that to market. We have to have agile business models. What you build today, the only certainty that we know to be true is that tomorrow it will change. And this is an evolving market. And so you need the agility in your software solutions to be able to adapt and future-proof your business. You can't put something in place today and 2 years from now, if you want to deploy a completely new business model, you can't afford to have to wait for that to happen. Open web services. You're going to there are multiple parties involved, so you're going to have to figure out how to partition data. And of course, cloud scalability and portability. So most enterprises want the freedom to go between cloud providers as much as cloud providers would like them to just use their cloud. They want that portability. And then more advanced analytics. I think that there's significant opportunity to continue to drive innovation in software companies that are really producing the analytics platforms for IoT. So we talked about earlier what the opportunity was, specifically on industrial internet, but what are they perceiving to be as getting in the way? It's what I talked about in the previous slide. There's not interoperability, there's not standards. Of course, the security concern. You've now just increased the total exposure in terms of the number of sensors that are now out there. Uncertain ROI, so it's a huge investment. And you see this evident when you are looking at the differences in terms of, like, for example, smart cities. In developing countries, they have aging infrastructure, so they have to upgrade that aging infrastructure, irrespective of whether they're interested in building smart cities. They just need to modernize. So it's a great opportunity to do that. But in developed countries, it's a significant investment to build out the capability to then enable IoT and the services as a result. So clearly some challenges ahead, and I think it's important that we all in the room recognize that we have our job to do to help drive some of these challenges and turn them into opportunities. We are moving from products to services to now what I think is an important transition, outcomes. Not everyone, as I said earlier, not everyone is going to be able to do this alone. You require an entire stack to make this possible. At its very bottom is the access network. On top of that is connectivity management. And if you're interested in building out IoT services, you need to be able to have device management, customer revenue management, analytics and data management, the ability to provide application creation, all of that. And what you're going to start to see is that this ecosystem or this platform will start to be driven across different industry segments, where you have specialty, whether it's SIs or software providers or hardware providers that are interested in building out an ecosystem of partners and software solutions that address a horizontal view of what they need to bring to market for these different industry segments. So I would argue that the future of IoT is actually demand sensing. We start off, as we talked about, from first looking at, okay, what efficiency can I get from an operational perspective in OpEx? We're now transitioning to a period of realizing the value in all of this ubiquitous connectivity and all this sensor technology, and we're starting to just get going in terms of some of the new products and services that are now possible. The next phase is a pay-per-outcome, and after that, it's the demand sensing industry ecosystems. And I have a really great example of one that already exists today that many of you may not be aware of, but I'm sure you're taking advantage of it as a consumer, and that's smart agriculture. So there's all of this sensor technology that is available in any smart farming equipment, where a piece of industrial equipment can come equipped with 250 sensors that put out 150,000 data points per minute. It's a lot of data. So what is it used for? So they're using IoT as a way to improve the efficiency and output of agriculture. So a sensor in a tiller will know precisely how deep to drill and where the nitrogen fertilizer needs to be placed to drive the maximum output of the crop. A tiller comes after and knows exactly where to place the seed to make that grow. So it's an ecosystem of farmers, industrial equipment, geolocation services. All of that is coming into play to create this efficient ecosystem that makes it possible for us to take advantage of improved crops and feed more and more people. And it's an example of what can happen if you start looking at it that way, as a horizontal ecosystem that benefits all of the parties, and how this could be applied to other industry sectors. So that's it. And I have 56 seconds. So.
If you have